everybody, and welcome to Inside D2Football. Thanks for joining us tonight with Chuck, Devin, Justin, Matt, Tony, and Chris. I am Brandon. So, again, thank you for joining us. Now's the time of the show when I usually tease what's going to happen over the course of the show. Of course, as you know, we're going to get to the regional rankings. But quite frankly, so much happened this weekend. We're just going to go ahead and dive right into it right now. And we'll go ahead and start in Super Region 1, where it was the craziest Super Region 1 a day I can remember in the history of this website. The first game we're going to talk about, number 12, IUP, was upset. I guess maybe you can call it an upset, but Gannon beats the Crimson Hawks 43-36. So, Chuck, like I said, on paper it's an upset, but Gannon's been playing pretty good this year.
Well, I'd call it an upset. I mean, some of the folks at Gannon were talking about this being one of the best wins in program history. So you're talking about a pretty landmark moment for them. I would say that it was a huge upset, but it was not a fluke. In my column last week, I said, I'm not going to pick Gannon to win this game, but I am going to say that if IUP is not ready, it's going to be a real struggle because Gannon's playing really good football right now, both offensively and defensively. So it really wasn't a fluke that Gannon won the game. They kind of beat IUP at their own game. They shut down the run. I think IUP had less than 60 yards on the ground, which is just not their game at all. It is worth noting that their leading rusher, Desir Stewart, did not play, but they really shut down that run game. Max Sexton and Dwayne Brown delivered for IUP. They played very well, but the star of the day was Gannon's quarterback, Corey Curtis. He accounted for 6 total touchdowns, passed for 342 yards. And Gannon winning this game really changes the landscape in the PSAC. It forces a 3-way tie in the West Division with Slippery Rock and IUP. So we can talk about tiebreaker scenarios if somebody wants to throw that in the questions. We can talk about that, but it's a 3-way tie. And the good news for IUP is that if it remains a 3-way tie, they still win that 3-way tiebreaker. And I'll talk about that in my column later in the week. But real game changer in the PSAC with that result.
Good job. Way not to give everything away on the Sunday night show. You guys are learning. I'm happy with this. I think this was truly an upset, even though I don't think Ashland's been playing that really well lately. But the Hillsdale Chargers, 36-20, a victory over Ashland. Unranked Hillsdale, what were they, like 4-4?
4-4, and they had a couple of really bad losses on their resume too. They lost 3 of the last 4, and some of them were just really not good losses at all. And as I was watching that game, I was remembering something that Tony said a couple of weeks ago about always struggling to get a hand on Hillsdale and who they are and what they're going to be. And this was definitely one of those days that they kind of proved that's kind of the team that they are. We just don't know from week to week, but they played really, really well. They didn't have huge, flashy offensive numbers, but they delivered when they really had to. They had 4 long scoring drives and they had a defensive touchdown as well. So great win for them. And I have to say, I'm pretty concerned about where Ashland's offense is right now. At this point in the season, you don't want to be going into the playoffs with a struggling offense, but that's really where they're at right now. So it puts them in a bad spot. When we see the rankings, we'll see that they're still in a good position as far as the rankings, but the way they're playing on the field, I have some real concerns about their ability to make a run. And their defense is still playing pretty well, but they have some real concerns to address on offense.
Okay. The other game that was of note in Super Region 3, one of the better games we've seen in a long time in the Northeast 10. Assumption, the powerhouse Assumption team, wins 14-13 over New Haven. And I think, we talked about this game in the undercard last week. And, as a joke, I think, not as a joke, but I always ask Tony, what do you think? Because we don't hold him to anything. He said he picked Assumption, right? So I think Tony was the only one to get it right.
Well, that was because of the Brian Kelly connection. Come on, we know. Well, we kind of say it in jest, powerhouse Assumption, but consider this: they have not given up more than 14 points in a single game to a Division II opponent this year. The only team that scored more than 14 on them was a Division I FCS team. So this was very much a defensive football game, as the score would tell you. Second time this year, Assumption beat a ranked team at home. The grand total of the points scored in those 2 games is 30 points.
Wow!
So they're playing some really good defense. Now, do they have the offense to put up some points when they start playing some tougher teams down the road in the postseason? we'll see. But they certainly have a defense that could take them a long way. They played outstanding football. The second half of that game was scoreless, and they held New Haven scoreless for the last 44 more minutes in that game. So they're playing some ball up there in Worcester.
All right, and our final game that was our final game in Super Region 1. So real exciting. I can't remember a crazier weekend in SR1, and that goes for the whole country though too. It was an incredible weekend. Let's go ahead and transition to Super Region 2, guys. Let's start in the CIAA, where Chowan, a 26-21 upset over Virginia Union. So Ferg, Virginia Union was rolling, Jada Byers was rolling, and Chowan had something to say about that.
Yeah, and I kind of threw some hints out even 2 weeks ago that Chowan could be a team that could pose some problems for Virginia Union. And, I caught a lot of flack for that on the interwebs. But really what kind of happened here is that 26-21 score is not as close as you think, because Virginia Union scored with like 33 seconds left in the game to try to make it at least look halfway decent. This all came down to the fourth quarter because in the first 3 quarters, Chowan really had done a really good job at slowing down the run game, the rush game for Virginia Union. And Jada Byers still got 100 yards rushing, but he didn't score in this game. And in the fourth quarter, it was really this defense that they have that has started to really gel. There's a lot of transfers that came in as Mark Hall and company rebuilt the defense to make it even stronger. And you kind of saw a pump blocked that was returned for touchdown, and an interception by Kamari Carey, who was one of the leading corners in the conference, a pick six to kind of salt this game away. So, Chowan is not exactly the flashiest, and if they and Fayetteville State make it to the championship game, it could be. It's a rematch of a game that was a 13-10 game, so it's not going to be a very flashy game. But defense travels. They traveled to Richmond, and they came away with the win. That's a big deal.
It is. All right. And ultimately, you only have to have one more point than the other team, and that's all that matters. So as much as we like to get into, beauty contests, doesn't matter. You win that week. That's all that matters. Let's look at the South Atlantic Conference. Limestone, a 42-37 win over Newberry. A couple of weeks ago, somebody told us that Newberry is the kind of team that can surprise you and win when you least expect it. Are they also the kind of team that may, let one slip through their fingers when you least expect it?
Yeah, that game on Saturday was definitely it was definitely a classic in the South Atlantic Conference. It was a shootout between both those teams. It was a game that we talked about last week was going to have huge implications in the playoffs and in the South Atlantic Conference Championship, and it was a little bit of a rivalry geographically between both programs, and it lived up to all that hype. Ultimately, it came down to a turnover by Newberry at midfield, which set up Limestone for the go-ahead touchdown. And the win for Limestone is the most wins ever in program history for the Saints. So that's a really, really cool deal, especially to have it in that game, in that environment, and with those ramifications. And
if everybody sticks around, you'll see that Limestone is at least, on the periphery of thinking about playoffs. Yeah.
There you go, Chuck.
Little love for the Limestone Saints, first winning season in program history. So
plus,
very happy for them.
Not that it matters, but it's a good color scheme and a fun. I like the helmet and the logo. So it's with so many bad ones.
They're playing football on campus this year for the first time ever. Yep. So some really good things happening there.
Well, and talk about the turnaround from last year to this year under Mike Fury. I mean, that's one of the most impressive turnarounds I think I've ever seen in such a short amount of time.
It's a lot of the same players, Justin. That's the thing, is like it's a lot of the same players. They were winless last year, and they took a big chance. And I will admit, I was very, very critical of the timing of their coaching change, because they fired their previous head coach in February after National Signing Day. I was very, very critical of that. I didn't think that was the right thing to do. But you know what? They took a big gamble, and they're trying to really get this program headed in the right direction. So it's paid off.
Is it the same players, guys? Real quickly, is it the same roster, or they brought in anybody?
They've definitely brought in some players for sure.
Okay,
but there's a lot of the same players from last year's team that did not win a game.
Okay.
So this is quite remarkable what they're doing right now.
Yeah, they have had a lot of turnover, but they do have a lot of the starters back as well. So the roster looks completely different, but there's a lot of guys that, like Chuck said, were on that team that didn't win a game.
All right.
That are there making impacts.
All right. And another game in the South Atlantic Conference that was of consequence and ended up being a close game. Wingate, a 24-21 victory over Lenore Ryan. The Wingate defense, like we thought and we discussed, traveled and did a great job. They come away with the win. Justin, you were at the game. What'd you see?
Yeah, that was the game was interesting. So Wingate jumps out into a 17-0 lead, goes into the half up 17-0. Everything looked like it was going Wingate's way. Their defense was playing well. Lenore Ryan comes out in the second half, and they take the lead 21-17. And all the momentum's going towards Lenore Ryan. They had some success throwing the football that got themselves back in the game and were able to get the ball downfield. Sean White throws an interception from deep, backed up in his own territory. I think Wingate got the ball on about the 7-yard line and punched it in for the go-ahead touchdown with about 3 minutes left in the game. Lenore Ryan had a chance. They were driving with the football, but they had 2 critical drops on 3rd and 4th down that sealed the deal and gave the ball back to Wingate. So it was a tough game for Lenore Ryan. They battled back from that 17-0 deficit, but just ultimately fell just a little bit short in a game that this is another one that lived up to the hype. I mean, it was a slugfest between these two programs, and it's a huge rivalry between these two. So Lenore Ryan had won the last 5 in a row in the series, and so there's a lot of momentum that Lenore Ryan had, and Wingate fought back. So it was a good win for the Wingate Bulldogs.
All right. And they're in a really good position in the playoff race, as you will see when we discuss that later. Let's go ahead and transition to Super Region 3. Let's start first in the GLIAC, guys. Davenport, God bless them. I've been downplaying them all year, talking about how they're going to finish the season with 3 straight losses. And they go in and they win at Saginaw Valley 29-28. So, here's your due, guys. Great job.
Yeah, for sure, Brandon. I mean, this kind of harkens back to when we were talking Super Region 1 a couple minutes ago with Gannon and IUP. I mean, is it really an upset? I mean, Davenport came into the game with the better record. They certainly hadn't played the same schedule with the same saltiness maybe this Saginaw Valley had thus far. But hey, Davenport did what they had to do to win this game. I mean, they came in with a game plan of, hey, we're just going to be methodical about what we do. They ran 40 more plays on offense than Saginaw Valley did. They possessed the ball for nearly 40 minutes. I mean, just a couple seconds short of it. So, I mean, offensively, yeah, they didn't have a gaudy per play average, but they just kind of methodically wore things out, including an 8-minute plus drive at the end of the game when they had the 1-point lead to run the clock out. So when you can run the clock out on somebody for 8 minutes at the end of the game, your offense is doing some stuff. And, look, in Saginaw Valley's defense, too, they were without Andrew Brito. I mean, so Jarris Grissom had to try and field things as a, converted wide out. And he actually played great. I mean, he had 154 yards rushing, I think, or 149 yards rushing, 3 touchdowns. He actually had a decent day throwing the ball. But at the end of the day, I mean, you take the combination of Davenport and how well their offense performed, and then Saginaw Valley really had chances to win this game. I mean, they were up 14-3 earlier in the second quarter, but they had 4 turnovers in this game, and they could not have been more inopportune in terms of how they impacted the flow of the game. There was one of them came one play after forcing a turnover from Davenport. Another one was on the 4th play after a takeaway. So you've got 2 of them right there that didn't net you anything and actually just gave the ball right back to your opponent. And then the other 2 were deep in their own end, where one was a 3-and-out to kick a field goal, and the other one was a 31-yard touchdown drive. So, I mean, if you take a couple of those mistakes away, Saginaw Valley may still have found a way to win the game. But, at the end of the day, you got to tip your cap to Sparky McEwen and the job he's doing with that staff. Jason Whitaker has really played well. He did have a couple of interceptions in this game, but he also made some really good throws, particularly on that last drive to run the clock out. So, I mean, hey, Davenport's, playing well enough to get to where they are, and that's, heading into week 10 without a blemish.
Tony, I got a question for you because you kind of mentioned something that's very critical for Saginaw is the fact that they're without their starting quarterback. And we've kind of seen, in that conference, teams like a Ferris who seems to be able to plug and play a quarterback when somebody goes down, and they quite weren't able to do that. Is that like one of the biggest differences between a Ferris State and a Saginaw Valley State at this point?
It's actually not a bad question, Ferg. Again, I think if you really look at the way Saginaw has played on offense all year, the types of numbers that Jarris Grissom put up in this game were not all that dissimilar to Andrew Brito's numbers. I mean, now, again, Brito is your quarterback. He's your guy. He's the guy who's gotten you this far throughout the season, and there's a reason for that. But if you look at the style of offense that Saginaw has employed all year, it's a very run first, and the quarterback does a lot of running. And again, I mean, Grissom had some really good throws in this game. I mean, I don't know his whole history, but he must have played some quarterback in high school or something. And so he was more than serviceable in this game. And again, I mean, he had a couple of big plays where, if he had enough snaps, Davenport may not have had an answer for him long enough to actually hang on to this game. So, but when you look at some of the other teams in the league, yeah, I mean, even Northern seems to be able to move from one quarterback to the other without missing too much of a beat. So I suppose you could make that assertion, but again, if you look at the way Saginaw plays, I don't know how applicable that is here. Brito and what Grissom did in this game, there are actually some similarities to it. So again, I'm not gonna say it had no impact, but I wouldn't classify that as the sole reason that Saginaw Valley didn't win.
I just think it's important because as we look at Davenport, who hasn't really been a big name, to this point, like this isn't a win that can be discounted because Saginaw starting quarterback didn't play. Like,
I would agree with that.
It was a legit win. It was a legit win.
Oh, and again, I mean, if you double your opponent's time of possession and you run 40 more offensive snaps, you're doing some work.
All right. All right, guys, let's go ahead and move on. Another important game, which was essentially a playoff elimination game, an absolute playoff elimination game. Northwest Missouri on the road beats Nebraska Kearney 28-24. Devin, what did you see?
Yeah, great game. Was there in person there in Kearney, Nebraska. Two evenly matched teams. UNK actually came out throwing the ball, had a lot of success with it, did a great job with the play action game and getting TJ Davis on the move in the pocket kind of deal to avoid the Northwest pass rush. So I liked what Kearney did there. They had 5 plays go over 30 yards, so a lot of explosive plays there for UNK. This helped them build up a 17-14 lead at halftime and then a 24-14 lead going into the fourth quarter. Mike Owens, started the game at quarterback for Northwest. Braden Wright came in for the last 4 drives to kind of help lead the comeback, but it wasn't really Braden throwing the ball. It was the Northwest offensive running game there. They ran 18 plays in the fourth quarter. 17 of those were runs for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns to complete the comeback win there. On the day, the Bearcats outgained the Lopers on the ground, 312 yards to 166. Once Northwest committed to running the football, it was game over because UNK could not stop them on the ground. It was an excellent performance by the Bearcats offensive line, and they got a huge win there at Kearney to keep their kind of the playoff streak alive there for Northwest.
All right. So that's going to do it for Super Region 3. Now let's go on to Super Region 4, where the most impactful games happened in the Northern Sun. So, Whit, the first game, you were there. Minnesota State, as we kind of all predicted and thought they would, a decisive, strong performance against Sioux Falls. They win 38-24.
Yeah, Minnesota State, Mankato just playing some of their best football right now. They really are. We all kind of were curious would Thurl Reisdorfer play the star running back for Sioux Falls, and he did. And I mean, in fact, he broke off a 40-yard run in the first few plays, but he had 70 yards at half and a score, and then all of a sudden he kind of got phased out to some extent because they were chasing 2 scores for pretty much the whole second half. And so with that, Mankato got off to a great start, off 21-7. They had the wind with them, extremely windy day in Sioux Falls, and Sioux Falls kind of spent the rest of the day chasing. Mankato's got a real young team, and they've really come together over the course of time here. And their quarterback, Hayden Eckern, has really become a star player for them, I think, in these last few weeks. He probably does about 15 runs a game, also throws the ball effectively. And, you can kind of see when Sioux Falls threw the ball 46 times in this one, they're getting themselves pretty far out of their comfort zone. So, Mankato is a team that you really don't want to see right now. They're really hot, and they're going to be moving up on the regional rankings as well.
Sure. The quarterback, Hayden Eckern, is he the guy that was supposed to start for them at the beginning of the year, or is that somebody that's come on lately?
No, you're correct, Brandon. He played the
Okay.
first half in their game against Bemidji, and they got out to a lead with him under center. He took a hit in that game right around halftime, and frankly did not make it back until the Wayne game, where he only played here and there because of the fact that he was still a little dinged up, and now that he's fully healthy, he's become a handful.
Right. Another game in the Northern Sunwit that is very impactful for Winona State, a team that, historically, I've thought of it as pretty good. When I first started the website, they were always on the edge or in the playoffs. Okay. Had a little aggression, but Brian Bergstrom's done a great job this year. They win a decisive victory, 24-7 over Augustana.
Yeah, and they really got after Augustana right away from the opening bell. They were up 14-0 after one quarter, and this is not a Winona team that's real explosive offensively, and I still have some concerns if their offense is really playoff ready. They netted 245 yards in this game, but their defense and special teams collectively is frankly probably the best overall together in the Northern Sun. That not only are they keeping opponents to low numbers, but they've scored 8 times this season between special teams and defense, which is really a nice number. But Augustana's kind of been on a little bit of a slide here, and last 2 weeks, frankly, have not played very good football. The Warriors were able to sack their quarterback, Casey Bauman, 4 times and pick him off twice. And Augustana was limited to just 7 points until, that they got in the fourth quarter. And by that time, the outcome was pretty much determined.
Well, the good thing for the Vikings and those of you who stick around and talk about the regional rankings, they're not out of the playoff picture yet. So it's an interesting year for this in terms of the playoffs. I want to reference one thing that wasn't on our schedule. And I was watching the Colorado School of Mines, who were trailing Western Colorado. I was making fun of the announcers because they were like talking about running out the clock with a 10-point lead with 8 minutes left, and I was talking about how ridiculous that was to try to milk something with 8 minutes left. But obviously, Davenport has the has the game plan for that, because I didn't think it's possible with 8 minutes. I thought there's 3 possessions left, but in any case.
Low-hanging fruit to pick on the broadcast crew of that game.
Oh, well, I do it all day, every day. So I'm,
there was just a lot of cheering in the booth there. A lot of let's go,
exactly.
Yeah, high fives and stuff. But yeah,
yes. Well, the thing is, in football, they were up by 10. They ended up losing by 10. So in that 8 minutes, there's a 20-point swing. But just shows you got to keep playing football. You can't wait around and think you're going to beat the clock. You've got to beat the opponent. And the best thing to do is keep playing football. Well, that is a look at what happened this week. When we come back, we will take a look and project the regional rankings. So stick around for that, why we thank those who support our site. Just wanted to take this opportunity to thank those who have supported D2 Football this year. D2 Football is free, but it isn't cheap. Your support helps offset our expenses and allows us to expand our coverage. If you like what we're doing, please consider supporting us. Visit d2football.com/support. Or if you want to do it the old-fashioned way, click contact on the website to find our mailing address. But again, thank you for supporting D2 Football. Hey guys, I'm gonna shake that up a little bit. I want to go ahead and share this. I thought we had it all taken care of, but one top 25 loss that we did not talk about was Texas A&M Kingsville, lost 2 in a row now, and Central Washington was able to beat them. So I thought that in the past couple of weeks we've looked at the top 25 results, and I thought we should bring that up to recognize Central Washington and Kingsville, second loss in a row, but they're not out of the playoff picture yet either. So
And one thing I would point out about that game was, I think Kingsville, and the way that their offense works, that doesn't generate a ton of yards, kind of let Central Washington hang around in this game. The most pivotal thing that happened in this game was in the third quarter when Kingsville elected to go for it on 4th and 2, and not only did they not get it, they basically fumbled the ball and gave it back to Central Washington with really good field position. Mm-hmm. So, with Central being able to, put some points on the board, whether it's a touchdown, field goal, they just basically hung around enough to make just enough plays to take this game. And that's the problem with playing Central Washington in Washington, is that at home, they're just a very formidable opponent when they're playing at home.
Well, as you said, I think it's indicative of the way that Texas A&M Kingsville's played all year. Stick around and win at the end, and you do that too often, you get burned and you lose at the end. So, go ahead, Devin.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talked about the top 25 teams that lost this week. Not even that. The 40 teams that were listed in the regional rankings, the initial ones, 12 of those teams lost. That's going to shake a lot of things up this week going into it. So, it's something to keep an eye on when the rankings come out this week, is how much just change we're going to see from last week on there and going forward on there. So,
all right, let's go ahead and start talking about the regional rankings. Guys, I'll bring them up. Let's go ahead and bring up Super Region 1. We're going to start there. All right, in Super Region 1, Shepherd moves up to number 1. They are the top. They would be the top seed if the playoffs were to start this week. They are both the top seed in terms of your winning percentage with strength of schedule added together. That's the 1.490 number. And also Inkblot sees them as the number 1 team too. So Chuck, what do you see? What do you see when it comes to the Super Region 1 rankings?
Well, it's a pretty easy pick for number 1. You only have one undefeated team in the region, so Shepherd gets the nod there for number 1. But I think you can see by looking at the SOS numbers, how much the losses for Ashland and IUP cost them in terms of maybe getting that number 1 seed and potentially the first round bye, because they're not that they're completely out of that could still happen. But based on the SOS, Shepherd would not be number 1 this week if Ashland or probably IUP had won, definitely Ashland. So, those losses hurt those teams, but not too much in terms of dropping in the rankings. And part of that is just because how competitive it's been throughout the region. When I looked at the projections that Inkblot shared on Twitter and looking at the data that's on his site, I was very close with what he has here. I think the real variable in this is assumption. Okay. On this list, we have them at number 5. I actually slotted Assumption at number 3, and Inkblot did in his projections as well. Now, you can make a case for Assumption possibly as high as 2 and as low as 5.
Right.
The disadvantage that Assumption has is the overall D2 winning percentage, because they have a 6-1 record as opposed to a 7-1 or an 8-1. So they have that working against them, but they have a very high opponent winning percentage or strength of schedule, I should say, and they've got a 3-1 record against teams over 500. So I think you can make a case for them going up a bit higher than where we see them in this list right now. I actually had them at 3. Whit, I know when you and I talked this morning, you had them slotted in at number 5, so you saw it a little bit differently.
Yeah, and my biggest focus, Chuck, was because we've kind of talked about in other super regions where the lack of wins or games, in this case 6-1 Assumption, with some teams above them with more games played and also having 1 loss. My thought was that maybe that comes into effect right there. But frankly, Chuck, the more I talked about it with you, I thought that you could probably make every bit as or better a case for Assumption at 3. So when I saw that after further review, I wouldn't be surprised with either one. And guys, I chatted with Chuck earlier today, and we thought that in each super region, there was kind of one team where you could kind of put in yellow highlighter, almost as if to say, that's the team I'm looking to see where they put them tomorrow, because it's going to shed some light on what's being valued more as well, in my opinion.
Whit, I've got a question. Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt, Chuck, but I've got a question for both of you.
So
what I'm not understanding. Oh, go ahead, Chuck. That's fine.
Well, let me kind of finish out some of my thoughts, and we can address some of those questions as well. So the only other thing that I would say on the list that you see here is that I did not actually have Kutztown in my top 10. I had them as the first team out in around 11. So I'm a little surprised that we have them here. I know Inkbot has them at 9. I can see how it got there. But when I look at the strength of schedule, Kutztown kind of falls in line a bit below some of the other 2-loss teams. And there's also a real convoluted mess with some results against common opponents, which can be used as part of the criteria. So you've got Kutztown, who lost to Assumption, but then Assumption lost to Bentley. Bentley lost to Westchester, or Westchester plays Kutztown. So you have a bit of a convoluted mess there. But I did not have Kutztown in my top 10. Now we're going to see over the next couple of weeks if Kutztown's a playoff worthy team or not. I actually saw Kutztown yesterday. Did not think that they played like a team that was trying to make the playoffs. They just looked very, very flat. So we'll see. And they close the season most likely playing Slippery Rock unless they get a schedule flip, depending on how the West Division shakes out. But that was the only other observation that I had here on the current list is that I did not have Kutztown in the running there.
Well, I mean, how are they justified in being in there? Their strength of schedule is so low. I mean, it's only slightly higher than Shepherd's, but Shepherd's undefeated. And then they're 1-2 against 500 teams. I just don't see why they're on this list.
Yeah, I guess if you want to talk to that, Whit?
Yeah, I mean, Chuck, you give me your thoughts after. I had New Haven in this top 10. And I did because if I take a look at their strength of schedule for New Haven, it's 499, and they are 3-2 against 500 or better. And I thought that looked, pretty favorable compared to a Kutztown. So that's why I had Kutztown out. But when you get down to the end of the line like this, guys, and you're talking your 9, 10s, and 11s, a lot of times we're kind of splitting hairs here. And it's really, you're just kind of staying a part of the conversation, because keep in mind, you're not on the 1 through 7 lines already. Yeah. So, but I did not have Kutztown in there myself. And keep in mind, I look at my stuff independent of what Chuck does and then just kind of chat with him about it. And we both had this done before Inkblot had his stuff published. So we were both a little bit surprised to see Kutztown on there. Would I be totally stunned if Kutztown's on the page tomorrow? No, because I think it's all that close. But for me personally, I would have had, both New Haven and Bentley in that 9 and 10 area.
Yeah, I actually had New Haven at 9 because of their head-to-head over Bentley. Right. So that's how I had it shake out. And you can also really see how much Gannon benefits from getting that big win over Slippery Rock, because now they're part of this conversation as well.
Sure.
All right. Let's go ahead and let me stop sharing that, and I will bring on Super Region 2. Okay. And if we were to have the playoffs commence on Saturday, Delta State, rightfully so, would be the team with the bye. We said the same thing last week. They earned a share of the Gulf South Conference title with their win over Mississippi College last week. And, look every bit the part of a team that could challenge and could get that bye, followed closely by Benedict. So, what is everybody's thoughts on this? Ferg, you go first, please.
Well, I think the biggest move here isn't on the page, and that was Fort Valley State losing to Savannah State, because that pretty much just moved them off the page altogether. And now you've got some newer teams on here, and then Lenore Ryan also losing kind of takes them out of the picture as well. And now you've got Mars Hill and Fayetteville State and Limestone in the conversation. Virginia Union losing, putting them in one, they're kind of out for the run for the 1 seed now. They're just hoping they probably get a home game at this point. And the interesting thing about this super region is that there is still so many games, pivotal games left to be played. That I think viewers just need to keep in mind that, most, if not all of these teams on here are still battling each other for playoff seeding or even a chance to get into the playoffs. Delta State's got West Georgia to play this upcoming week. You've got the SAC championship game, the SIAC championship game. That's going to be Benedict and Tuskegee. The CIAA championship game, that's Chowan and likely Chowan and Fayetteville State at this point. So, there's just so much left to be sorted out here. The one that kind of strikes out to me as vulnerable not getting in is Albany State at number 8. Somebody loses above them and they're at risk of being leapfrogged. So if it plays out and everybody kind of wins out, then yeah, Delta State probably being the number 1 seed kind of makes sense. But Benedict's going to have a bit of a boost after next week with Tuskegee and kind of see how that plays out. And there's just so much to digest with this region that it's almost like, let's wait another week and see what happens, guys, and then go from there.
Sure.
Well, let's fight a little bit more tonight, though, before we move on.
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't have Mars Hill in the top 10 at this point. That SOS is the lowest of any of the 40 teams that we're looking at tonight. 6-1 with the lowest SOS. I don't have Mars Hill in at this point. I actually had Limestone in at number 9 when I ran the numbers this morning.
Yeah, and looking at that, Mars Hill, I mean, that their SOS is kind of weighing them down right now. And when you take a look at the end of the line there, I mean, I didn't have a huge issue with Limestone coming in right there at 10, Fayetteville State up and Mars Hill out because of the SOS. And, I mean, as Ferg alluded to, we've got games up here that are really going to determine who should be on those lines.
Right.
I think at the top, Brandon Benedict and Delta State's a little closer than most people would
agree.
Would think. As we kind of move down the page a little bit, West Florida is the team I have in highlighter in terms of where do you put them? Now we had that. I think somebody mentioned their record on the page here.
Yeah.
It should be 6-1.
Correct.
So with that they're that team who has not played as many games as the others, but they have a really high strength of schedule. So that all kind of comes into play a little bit. And, we kind of referenced, before our show, there's some teams that have a loss, for example, that, isn't kind of on the radar here. Like Wingate, they're 4-0, but I mean, their losses to what? Emory and Henry, who's a team with a losing record. So in the current system, they don't get hurt by that very much.
They don't, Whit.
I think should change.
You and I have talked about that before. It's almost to your advantage if you have a loss. It's almost to advantage that it's a bad loss to a team that's not even in the picture here, because now Wingate's not at a head-to-head disadvantage to any of these other teams. So it is almost a situation where if you're going to lose a game, lose to somebody who's not even in the top 10 or part of this picture at all, and that's where Wingate's at. And as a result, they're number 3 because they're 8-1.
Right.
But if that loss is to, one of these other teams, then it's a very different story.
Right.
I think it's a little interesting if you look at 5 and 6, because Virginia Union kind of has better numbers than Tusculum does at that 5-6 mark. And I think Inc. has them kind of reversed there. But really,
does.
But the 5 through 8, the strength of schedule, or 5 through 9, the strength of schedule is not very good. And either one of those are just at risk of being leapfrogged.
Well, Chris, Chris, I bet if you look at it with the exact same winning percentage plus opponent's winning percentage, I bet the next default sort was alphabetical, which is why Tusculum was ahead of Virginia Union with the way I sorted them. So they could easily be the other way. So I think they probably are at 5, like Inc. And I think, Chuck, did you and Matt both get that?
Yeah. Yeah, okay, I have Virginia Union at 5 and Tusculum at 6.
I immediately had Virginia Union at 5 without a whole lot of thought, to be honest.
Okay. Yeah, so I think that's the way to properly look at it.
Right.
Okay. All right. Sorry to interrupt, Chris. I just wanted to point that out. So I was confused, and I wanted to make sure nobody else was either. So,
Oh,
all
it's
right.
all good.
All right. Let's go ahead and move to Super Region 3, guys. Let me pull that up. All right. As we look at Super Region 3, the Lakers from Grand Valley would get the bye if the playoffs were to start. Clearly going to be, clearly the number one this week for sure. And there's no scenario in which I don't think they'll be if they don't win out. So Lakers with the bye. Tony, what else are you seeing in Super Region 3?
Well, the game that we talked about from Super Region 3 earlier, Davenport at Saginaw Valley, I mean, that almost had a certain playoff life type of implication to it from the standpoint that, I think throughout most of the season, we had talked about Saginaw Valley even having dropped the 2 games that they did to Grand Valley and Ferris State. If they were to win out and finish 9-2, they probably would have had a pretty good claim to one of the spots. And now that they've got 3 losses, they're knocked out. But Davenport now is in a position where even if they lose at Ferris and home to Grand Valley over these last 2 weeks, they're going to be a 2-loss team. And if you look at their strength of schedule right now, it's 496, but they're going to play Ferris this week. That's going to give them a 6-1 against D2 competition.
Mm-hmm.
And then Grand Valley, presuming that they hold serve against Wayne State this weekend, they're going to be a 9-0 that's going to get added. So their strength of schedule number is going to go up significantly. So even if they were to lose both of those games, it stands to reason from how I'm looking at it that they'd probably still be in the bracket.
Right.
And then I think, a couple other interesting things to watch too is that we keep seeing Truman State and Indianapolis both chugging along, getting wins. They still play each other at the end of the year in week 11. So there's going to be a playoff win and you're in type of aspect to that. But you could almost start to make the case when you look at their strength of schedule numbers, even the loser of that might still have enough of an advantage over some of the insular scheduled teams from the GAC and the MIAA that is it still that kind of doomsday scenario that Devin brought up a couple of weeks ago, which are the MIAA and GAC potentially playing for their 1 spots each?
Yeah, I think so. When you and I are talking, there's a team in each region that you kind of look at and say, well, where does this team belong? Where I could see a couple different spots here. For me, it's Ouachita. And I think that they're very interesting. And I think that Ouachita fans probably need to prepare to be a little bit disappointed when the rankings come out tomorrow. We have them slotted here possibly at 5. I know Inkbot has them at 5. I really was unsure. Do they belong up at 3 because of the 9-0 record? If you look at the SOS, it doesn't really hold up to some of the other teams. So I think 5 is realistic to where they might land. And I know that'll be a little disappointing for Ouachita fans, but I think that's what might happen.
I think also, Chuck, there's kind of 2 things that I'm seeing right now when I look at the page. Is one of them, I know Ink's got Henderson State. If we move all the way to the right, we can see he's got them 8. I just don't have them that high, and I don't see it myself. I have Emporia State higher than them because of the strength of schedule by almost 30 points. I think the 2-2 versus 2-1 against 500 is a small difference. There's about 500 points higher on that PI, for Emporia. For me, I would have Emporia higher than Henderson State. But once again, we're not talking about teams that are in the top 7 here. I'm assuming that he's giving Henderson State some kudos for having beaten a Harding, whereas Emporia State has not beaten a team that's in this list. So, I mean, he may be going that direction, and he and I are probably splitting hairs over that. The other thing that really jumps out to me, I think Tony kind of was alluding to it, guys, is that the teams that we're looking at right now in the 8, 9, 10 line, no matter how you sort them out for those insular schedules with the 500 SOS at the end of the year, they've almost got a little bit of a cap here. Meaning if your Trumans, your Indies, and all these teams here, even your Davenports, if they have 2 setbacks, all of them are going to be over that 500 SOS and probably over comfortably. I'm talking about like 530, 540, to the point where you wouldn't just choose one of the teams 8, 9, and 10 over them unless everything else was just crazy for those squads. And when you really look at it, none of those groups on 8, 9, and 10 have great numbers against 500 or better or things like that. And the fact that they have 2 losses probably leads to that. But I think that's what we're running into is I think it's almost like they need an Indy or a Truman to almost lose twice. And I think that's a heck of an ask.
Well, but Indy and Truman do have to play each other.
Well,
So
right.
I think that's why the 8, 9, and 10 is so important of a conversation is because, well, what happens if one of those two all of a sudden are a 2-loss team? Because it's inevitable it's going to happen.
Well,
yeah, but I think to Witt's point, Ferg, is that, for those teams, for the Emporias, Hardings, those types of folks, they've got to hope that either Indy and or Truman, one of them or both of them lose this weekend.
Yeah, twice.
So that one of them then becomes potentially a 3-loss outfit and works their way right out. Because if they both win this weekend and you've got one of them as a 1-loss and the other one as a 2-loss, I got a hard time figuring out where the math doesn't indicate that those two teams still don't make one of the top 7 lines.
Just to set up the schedule, guys, Truman has McKendree this week, and then, as you said, finishes with UIndy. Indianapolis has William Jewell this week. So the only scenario that happens is McKendree winning over Truman.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Brandon, what we haven't mentioned is who's on the 11 line here. And that's essentially Northwest Missouri State. And we're bringing it up because of the fact that they've got this long streak and, they've been the best team in recent history, a lot of reasons. But, they're kind of working their way slowly into this conversation. They weren't at 11 last week. They were lower than that.
Yep.
So they're kind of moving themselves up. But once again, they're going to cap at that 500 SOS. Mm-hmm. So they're going to need help somewhere in that top 7 as those other squads who are sitting there too.
And I'll bring this up real quick. So after next week, because Emporia, they have Lincoln this next week, who's winless, and Northwest has Missouri Southern, who's just under 500. Their resumes next week will be identical going into that final week of the season. And both those teams, in all honesty, are rooting for Central Oklahoma to lose and finish below 500, and for Missouri Western to win out and finish above 500 to help out their above 500 criteria mark in that one, because that would help take a loss away from Emporia and Northwest and add a win in there. So instead of being 2-2, they'd be 3-1. That category, that could be a category that could help the MIAA teams in that situation. We saw it last year with Washburn getting in the playoffs with a above 500 record over another GAC team in there. So we saw that last year be a factor on there. So I'm just something to keep an eye on the teams that are not listed here, but are playing in other games that could affect who gets in these final 7 teams as well.
I want to address this first,
glaring thing, guys.
Okay, hold on. Let me address this, Tony, because I saw this comment and I want to address it now. I agree with Reed Jorgensen that Super Region 3 hasn't been based on math in a long time, but as we talked about it last week, Tony, the math and the strength of schedule have never been the disparity's never been this large.
Correct. And so where I was going to go with that too is, and this may not be a math problem, but if Henderson State beats Ouachita in the last game of the season, then what happens? Now the MIAA teams are really scrambling because Henderson all of a sudden is going to have a 3rd win over a 500-plus team. All of a sudden, their quality wins look awful good. Now, it doesn't matter. Does that even at that point, does it matter if Northwest wins out?
Right.
Hey, Brandon, I guess the question would become, what criteria would see one of those 8, 9, and 10 teams getting in? I mean, unless someone drops out of that top 7 currently.
Well, I think that you guys a friend of mine had pointed it out 3 weeks ago that this possibility was going to happen. And every week it looks more and more like it will happen. Inc. has said, that it's not as clear cut as we're making it, but it sure looks like it to me. I mean, how would one justify putting a 9-2 Northwest or a 9-2 Emporia State with basically what might be a 500 record against teams above 500, probably no wins against teams that are ranked in that criteria? against another team who would have wins potentially against multiple wins against 500 plus teams and a strength of schedule that is 50 or 100 points higher. I don't see it, but I don't select them. But I just don't see it, Matt. It was like I said, it was sent to me 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago. I said, "Hey, look at this," and you said that's exactly right. What the situation was. Just like this week, we're looking to say, "Hey, Davenport's in." It's now Davenport's is even more in than our crazy MIAA GAC only one team each scenario. But we never would have picked that out a couple of weeks ago. But if I were a lawyer and taking this to trial, what would my opening statement be as to why they deserve to get in? Well, the opening statement is, this is one of the best leagues in the country, and this is the second best team in that league. That's the only opening statement. Unfortunately for the MIAA, nowhere in the criteria does it say that your league is awesome and you get to get a second team in. Nowhere does it say that. So I don't know that an argument can be made.
Well, Davenport is another one of those teams that still has really 2 tough games to play here, and their strength of schedule will go up. But if they fall to 7-2, that's another team that still probably is going to be in play of making it into the playoffs. So the 8, 9, 10, and 11 got they need a lot of help here, and that help may not even be available at this point. We just don't know.
Yeah.
And it may end up being we can't explain what happened here, guys, but here's what the committee is selecting.
Absolutely. And one thing to notice here as well is Davenport has the head over Truman as well. So Davenport's really rooting for UIndy in there to kind of secure their final spot there because all the head-to-head over Truman in that bunch of 2-loss teams. That's at least one common that everyone can agree on there. Davenport how the 2 win over Truman there to get in over Truman. In that situation, if Truman beats UIndy at that point, who knows? Kind of deal with it. I'm guessing he still probably get in, but it would at least be more of a guarantee for Truman.
Wasn't that a 1-point win?
Yes.
That's how critical this is.
Yeah.
That 1 point can really cause a big difference in all of this.
And it was 1 point back in week 1.
Yeah.
Back in week 1 before we knew what either of those teams were.
Yeah. All right, guys. That is absolutely enough about Super Region 3. Let's move on to Super Region 4.
Oh my gosh, that was so much fun. Well, it's like you have all these undefeated teams, and then you have 2 lost teams, and it's just so different than the other Super Regions we've talked about so far.
Yep.
Until you get to this one, of course.
And then you have a whole bunch of 2-loss teams.
Right.
Hey, you're ripping on my people.
Going to 3 lost teams. All right. It's Super Region 4. Angelo State, clear cut number 1 in this region. They would get the bye, but unlike the other regions, and certainly unlike Super Region 3, even a 3rd loss doesn't eliminate you from playoff contention. What do we see here, Whit?
Yeah, I mean, Angelo State could no show this next week, and they'll still be on the 1 line. But as I kind of break it down this way, Brandon. After obviously Angelo State's by themselves,
right?
Colorado Mines. We've kind of joked around, guys, a month ago about, boy, they're not the team that you want to see coming into your yard on week 1. Yeah, they won't need to. They're on the 2 line right now, so they're hosting a game. So Mines. Mankato and Winona, I think, are very, very clear cut right now. 2, 3, and 4 on this. I'd be shocked if that wasn't the case come tomorrow. And then when you get to 5, 6, 7, things get a little wonky. Kingsville is the team with the highlighter on it. For me, because they played 2 less games. They got a really strong SOS. They're sliding bad right now. That's part of the criteria. But, if I take a hard look at this here, I think they will have Sioux Falls ahead of them last week or this week because I got every impression Sioux Falls is probably ahead of them last week. So if they are, Sioux Falls has closed the gap a little bit with regard to SOS and other stuff. So Sioux Falls should probably be on the 5 line. Exactly what as Incas here. I have the same thoughts. Kingsville is what I had on the 6 line, but frankly, you could have them as low as the 9 because of the fact that they've got the 2 losses and not that many games played. But then after that, that's where it gets a little interesting, because if you take a look at Augustana on the 9 line, Inc. has them slotted as high as 7.
Wow.
And the reason why is because of the fact that even though they have 3 losses, their strength of schedule is almost lapping the teams that are directly in front of them, and they have beaten Bemidji and Wayne both. Now, I'm not sure I'm ready to go quite as far as to say Augustana should leap up to 7. I personally had them 9 myself because they don't have anything, as you move to the further right, 500 or better, they're 3-3 and so forth. But they do have a little bit better, PI than some of those teams. I personally would have had, Bemidji, then Wayne, then Augie, and then Central Washington, as you see right there. And, guys, we just talked about the importance of like 1 point or something. Wasn't Central Washington the one who had the kick going back the other way that they didn't get a block on?
Yes.
Yeah, they would have. Yeah, that's kind of a big play right now.
The special teams player of the week, right, Whit?
It was, yeah. So if you guys look at it, they would have been 6-2 here. That's a different conversation, for them or whatever it would have been. So
yeah,
but,
as it is, I have Central as the 10th team in my rankings.
Right, and obviously, Inc. does too. Western New Mexico looked a little bit better in terms of their cumulative, strength of schedule and record, but I would be surprised to see them there.
Well, there's that week 2 loss to Central Washington as well. So
right, exactly right. So. Chuck, you've obviously given a hard look over these numbers earlier today. What other thoughts did you have kind of looking at the page?
Well, the big variable is Kingsville because they have the strong SOS and they still have a good record. But you look at a 5-2 in the middle of all those 7-2s, and you really do kind of have to wonder how the committee is going to weigh that. So when I first put this together, I had Kingsville a little bit lower, but then kind of reconsidering their SOS, who they've played, I think 5 is right. I think I ultimately landed at 6 for them. 5 or 6 is probably right.
Sure.
But I think what really jumps out here is just, how much, Ferg was saying this about Region 3, but with the NSIC and all the teams from that conference that we're seeing on this list, there are still games to be played among those teams. So there are still a lot of things that will be resolved here on the field. I know, Mankato plays Winona, last game of the season?
Yes.
So that's going to be a huge one. So there's still a lot that's left to resolve here. But I think what this kind of shows is that it's very likely that we will have a 3-loss team, maybe more than one, from Super Region 1 that will make the postseason.
Yeah, and Chuck, what you just alluded to, we have Sioux Falls hosting Wayne State this weekend. So right there, that's 6 versus 8. Somebody's going to be dropping 3 losses. And then the other game you mentioned with Mankato, obviously playing Winona, and somebody's going to drop to 3 losses. Those 2 teams up there, the 3 and 4 line, have a high enough strength of schedule right now that even with a 3rd loss, they could still end up being not in a terrible spot in this top 10, in my opinion. But I think the thing to kind of watch out for that no one's been talking about seeing happening is Mankato could still end up on this 2 line, which sounds wild, but Colorado Mines has, some losses or some games, I should say, coming up against lower teams. And Mankato is going to have a higher strength of schedule than what you're seeing there. And both are probably going to land right around 550 for an SOS, but Mankato's going to get one more win if they were to beat Winona. They would have 5 wins over 500 or better. All of a sudden, they may end up on that 2 line, which would really make SR4, I think, all the more interesting if they were there. I really do.
Yeah, I think it's possible.
I think that would suck, though, because, Mines having to play some really challenging teams and getting stuck at the 3 seed like that just
Well, Ferg, I agree. They played some really tough teams in week 1 and 2.
Yeah. I just want to mention about Kingsville, if we go back to them for a second. they've got Western Oregon on the schedule, and Western Oregon's, a little unpredictable, but
Yes.
to me, they're giant killers. So that game looms is really, really important in the last week of the season in Lone Star.
Ferg, I think we're having a hard time landing on who exactly Kingsville is when they're playing teams that are in this mix.
I'm not.
I
I don't think they're good enough.
agree.
Yeah, but
who am I? I'm a WT guy, so don't mind me.
yeah.
Well, that was Brandon Meisner, by the way, guys. He hosts the show. He was the one saying that, just in case
Yes.
anyone was curious.
And I nailed my Davenport prediction so well that you should probably trust me on this.
Yes.
This Kingsville
But
prediction.
you did.
So,
You have been doing good in the pick'em, so there.
so not last week, but all right. Anything more on Super Region 4, guys? Are we good there? All right. Since everybody's talking, I'll just go ahead and move on. Let's go ahead and look at the pick'em since you brought that up, Matt. I want to show you guys something though. That this is a pick'em from 2 weeks ago. You'll notice that first column we all just dominated, and and got that right. So, all right, looking at the pick'em from last week, you might want to take a look at the first column. We're a bunch of geniuses around here. So, whenever there is a game that we all agree on, your best bet would probably be, to make a little money off and by picking opposite of us. So that was not good. However, I am happy that I can brag that I was probably the top one for one time in the history of this show. 6-1. That was a real good performance by me.
Did you just go with Massey picks or something? How did that work out?
How did that really work out? Enough teams scored late. Northwest pulled out at the end of the game. Central Washington pulled a miracle. It could have easily flipped the other way. So, but you got to brag when you can. So, and this is probably my only chance this whole year.
What you're saying is I should have picked Northwest, then they wouldn't have lost.
Well, if you'd have picked Northwest, they would have lost based upon our trend. That is correct, Chris.
So Bearcat fans, send your gift cards to Chris. All right.
All right, let's go ahead and pull up the undercard. This is what's going on this week. Central Washington is at Angelo State. If anybody believes that Central Washington is going to pull out the win, go ahead and tell us why. But otherwise, I think we would all pick Angelo State, right?
Yeah, you know what, Brandon, Central Washington's kind of going between two quarterbacks and trying to figure some things out, and they've had some injuries and whatnot on offense. So I think Angelo's probably a pretty safe pick here. Yeah.
All right. Northern State at Bemidji State. Man, that's a really good game, Whit. Without giving away too much of your column, or in your case, your great podcast, as good as anything on the radio in Division II. What do you think about this one?
We're going into week 10, and now he's worried about me giving it away in the column. Anyway, okay. I don't think anybody takes Northern State here. That's not to say this isn't going to be a really good football game. Northern State has the best defense in the conference, but Bemidji's really come on, and I think they're as good or better than anybody in the Northern Sun. I got him here.
Okay.
Go Beavers.
Albany State is at Fort Valley. Not quite as meaningful as a game as it looked maybe a couple of weeks ago, Chris, but still an important game as Albany State's at least on the outside looking in at the playoffs, even if Fort Valley is a little too far away to say the same thing about them. But what do you think about this one, Chris?
Yeah, I think, this is kind of the whoever wins is going to be on the fringe.
Mm-hmm.
But, certainly Fort Valley's loss this past weekend to a sub 500 team is really, really painful here. And I think the other thing is that, Albany's only got one D2 loss here. So they really need this game to keep pace in the hopes that somebody really slips up. But Fort Valley had such a great season. They got such a great running game. And I just wonder, this isn't going to be a high-scoring game, I don't think. It's going to be a slugfest. And whoever, like I said, whoever wins is still on the fringe in Super Region 2.
Okay.
And I would just add to that, records and playoffs aside, this is a big rivalry game.
Yeah.
For these two teams. So there's a reason it's the last week of the season for them. They call it the Fountain City Classic. I think that's the name for it.
Mm-hmm.
They play at a neutral site. It's an in-state rivalry, so it's a big deal for these teams.
Right. In the Lone Star, I think this is a much closer game than the records would indicate, even though I'm really not that sold on Midwestern State, but Midwestern State 5-4 versus Texas A&M Kingsville 7-2.
I think we would all take Kingsville, but at the same time, I don't think any of us would be real surprised by Midwestern State winning here. I mean, there's been a lot of parity in the Lone Star for teams not named, Angelo State. So
Yeah.
This wouldn't surprise, I don't think, any of us.
All right. In the GLIAC, Davenport, undefeated Davenport, giving you guys your due, will face Ferris State 7-1. Tony, tell us why Davenport will win the game. Okay, no, just kidding. Just tell us how they can win the game.
If they can force some turnovers by Ferris, that's going to be one of their ways to do it. Obviously, they were successful in capitalizing on turnovers last week against Saginaw Valley, and they need to try and possess the ball. They need to have a similar game plan and be successful at it to what they did against Saginaw this past week, and being able to keep the ball away from the Ferris offense. And again, if Ferris makes some mistakes, then Davenport's going to have to cash in on those and make them count. But I don't know. I watched a good chunk of the Ferris game up at Northern this past weekend, and no Malik Mitchell, no Evan Commons, no problem. I mean, Carson Gulker got the start, looked fantastic in the first half. Jesse Rivera played the whole second half for Ferris, moved the offense just fine. So I mean, I still think this is an uphill climb for Davenport, and that's not to say that they aren't warranted of being respected as an unbeaten team. Until we see them do something on the field against the Ferris and/or a Grand Valley, I'd be surprised if anyone on this panel would have
Correct.
picked Davenport.
That's a point I'm going to make later in addressing some of the comments. Last one in the undercard, Chris. If you remember earlier. And you probably don't remember this, but I do because I felt bad about it. When Dr. Alvin Parker was on, I accidentally called his school Virginia State rather than Virginia Union. Will Virginia Union, the Panthers, take it out on Virginia State this week because of the slight by me?
Man, I don't know. This is the battle of the doctors. Both head coaches have doctorate degrees. That's how high you have to go on the educational scale in order to get the job set up. But these are two teams that are a bit identical in their offensive philosophy. Virginia State has two running backs, Darius Higgins and Upton Bailey, who have rushed for 100 yards apiece in the last two games. They are that good in the running game, and Virginia Union on paper has more than what Virginia State does, but being it's a rivalry game and it's in Petersburg, what better way for Virginia State to kind of spoil Virginia Union's sort of surge in the polls here by just possibly knocking them out of the playoffs. I mean,
Right.
That's a big deal.
All right. Let's go ahead and go to the pick'em now, guys. The main card. Wayne State versus Sioux Falls, Tusculum versus Mars Hill, Gannon against California, West Georgia is at Delta State, Minnesota Duluth is at Augustana, and Newberry is at Wingate. Let's go ahead and let's start with the Wayne State and Sioux Falls, and I'll pick so that Matt can pick last. And I am going to pick Sioux Falls in this one to rebound, even though Wayne State coming off a great win this past week. Chuck.
Yeah, I'm going to go Sioux Falls as well. I think the momentum would point the other way, but I think Sioux Falls is going to bounce back. I'll go with the coup.
Okay. Devin.
I'll take Wayne State in this one. I like the way they're playing right now compared to what Sioux Falls is.
Okay. Justin.
Well, obviously, if you looked at my results from last week, you know that whoever I pick is a really bad choice. But all kidding aside, I'm going to take Sioux Falls at home in this one.
They would like to. They would like to know if you'd like to reconsider that pick there, Justin.
All right, Chris.
Well, Justin, that was a great monologue for an introduction to me because anybody who I pick tends to have the kiss of death on them. So I'm going to go with Wayne State and roll the dice here.
Okay.
So one of us is going to come at us with a win, Ferg.
You guys are teaming up together here on this.
So, all right, Whit, you'll be the final selection on this one.
Well, this will be the 10th time these squads have played since Sioux Falls has joined the Northern Sun, and Sioux Falls has won the other 9 games. Now, I say that only because my partner on the podcast will surely point that out in a matter of days.
The main question, though, for anybody who listens to your podcast is, does Wayne State put out a good 2 deep?
Yeah, well, I'm sure I'll find out by Tuesday evening. But
fair enough.
Yeah, because I'll hear about it. But I think Sioux Falls does get a bounce back game here. But I think Wayne's a very, very good opponent.
Mm-hmm.
Sioux Falls had trouble stopping quarterback runs, whether it was Duluth or also against Mankato. That's a real risk with Wayne State. Nick Bone, he may run it 25 times. So I think it's going to be a really well-fought game, but I do have Sioux Falls getting the W.
All right. Let's move on to Tusculum at Mars Hill, South Atlantic Conference action. Former South Atlantic Conference columnist Chuck Bittner gets to go first.
Oh, these teams are always habitually difficult to read. I whiffed on picks for both of these teams many, many times, but I'm going with Tusculum. I feel pretty confident in that.
Okay. Devin Albertson.
I will go with Tusculum as well.
Okay. And Chris.
Yeah, normally I would probably consider going with the potential underdog here, but I think Tusculum will have just enough to get past this one.
Okay, Whit.
Well, my affinity for the Massey machine, and they like Mars Hill here, and Mars Hill's been hot. Well, actually, both these teams have been hot. I'm taking Mars Hill in this one.
Okay. And I am actually going to go with Tusculum, and then Justin, you get to pick last.
So, I'm gonna take Mars Hill in this one for a couple of reasons. One, I think their run game has been really strong as of late, and if they can continue to run the ball like they had the last couple of weeks, it's going to be hard for Tusculum with their high-powered offense to get the football back and score. Mars Hill run game has been really strong, as well as their they take their shots down the field when they need to, and if they can connect, they have the ability to put up a lot of points and a lot of points in a hurry. And their defense is pretty good up front as well. So for that, I'm going to take Mars Hill at home.
Very good. All right, moving on to the PSAC, where Gannon, 7-2, will travel and play the Vulcans of California at 4-4. Devin, you get to go first.
I will take Gannon in this one.
Okay. And Justin.
I'm going to take Gannon as well.
Okay. Ferg.
I'm going to take California.
Okay. Whit.
Don't be fooled by the records here unless Cal is, decide they're going to mail this in, which I don't think they will. I think they've had some close games this year, and I think they're a better football team maybe than their record suggests. I like them winning this one.
Okay. I will pick Gannon for the exact reason you talked about. I think that they have a lot to play for, even a potential playoff berth. And I think it's possible that Cal might not be as motivated as they once were, considering how high their expectations were coming into the season. I absolutely loathe when media people talk about motivation and somebody wanted it more, tried harder. It bothers the crap out of me. Having said that, I think Gannon needs it and wants it more, so they're going to win this one. All right, Chuck.
California has let me down so many times on picks this year that I feel like I have to just ride it out with them and stay with them and see if they can come through with me. So I do have some concerns that they just, they're a bit deflated, but they are still a very talented football team. This is a final chance maybe for them to make some noise, and I'll go with the Vulcans.
Okay. Let's start with Justin in the Gulf South Conference action. He wrote for the Gulf South last year. West Georgia is at Delta State. What you got there?
Yeah, and I think that 6-2 record for West Georgia is deceiving. I think they're a really, really good football team, and I think they have the potential to make a deep run here in the postseason. But Delta State is hot right now. They clinched a share of the Gulf South Conference Championship this past weekend, rather, in that winning against Mississippi College. So I'm going to take Delta State in this one at home.
Okay, Ferg.
West Georgia has already let me down. Therefore, I shall not pick them. Delta State, give me the Okra.
Okay, Matt.
What I find interesting is West Georgia's strength of schedule. I looked at it today. They're 456, really low number, especially considering, the league they're in and everything else. But, they started off the year with Carson Newman and Morehouse, and that hasn't helped them in terms of out of conference. I'm taking West Georgia in the upset over Delta State. I think they're a better football team than their record suggests, like Justin, and I'm agreeing with him in back-to-back picks, so I'm immediately questioning my own judgment.
Well, I think Delta State is relieved that you're picking them, so it will not be unanimous, because that has been the kiss of death by this squad.
Yeah,
but I picked them, so I mean they should be afraid.
Chuck, who do you have?
Well, if this last week taught us anything, it's just how difficult it is to go undefeated, regardless of your competition. It's just really hard to do it. But I think Delta State's going to stay undefeated. I kind of disagree with you guys. I think 6-2 is exactly who West Georgia is. I've watched them a couple times. They do some things really well. But I haven't seen anything that's really that impressive. And I've seen a lot of things out of Delta State that I really like. So I'm going with Delta State.
Okay. And Devin, you're the last one for this game.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with Chuck on this one. I think Delta's been very, very good this year. I trust that offense to do their thing, and just give me Delta State in this one.
All right. Moving on to the Northern Sun. Minnesota Duluth will play Augustana. Man, this is a great game to try for a pick 'em. This is a tremendous one. Chris, you get to go first.
Gosh, both of these schools have just let me down. They both had injuries and key roles. I mean, God, Augie is just I can't do it. I just can't do it anymore. I'm gonna go with Duluth.
Okay. And I will go with Augie because Duluth let me down last week. So this is just purely a spite pick out by me.
It's all emotion.
I mean,
all emotion.
It is, because this is I think this is a perfect game for a pick 'em, because it's like, oh my goodness, Duluth, but Augustana's, just headed in the wrong direction. But with the chance of a playoffs, will they respond? How healthy they're going to be. Anyway, sorry, that's just all the ramblings and things going through my head. It's a great game. Good job, Matt. Chuck, your pick.
I think that this will not be a great game.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm taking Duluth.
Okay. All right. Devin.
I hate picking Northern Sun games. I don't know. These teams always burn me on these. It's always Witt's conference. It gives me the most trouble in the pick'ems here, but I'll go with Duluth to get a win here.
All right. Justin.
I'm going to go with Augustana.
Okay. All right. Witt, who you got?
I need to ask Chuck. Chuck, why do you think this will not be a great game?
I think this is two teams that are really just kind of slogging through the season. Not that they've given up or they aren't trying, but
Sure.
Augustana's team was a little bit of a tough watch. I had picked them, so I watched a bit of their game against Winona. It was just kind of a tough watch. Again, not that they aren't trying, but they're pretty dinged up, and I just don't think it's going to be. I think it'll be a competitive game. I don't think it'll be a particularly good game.
Okay, that's fair. I didn't know where you're going with that. Duluth got blown out 2 weeks ago by Bemidji. Augie got blown out 2 weeks ago by Mankato, and then they lost, fairly convincingly to Winona this last weekend. Mm-hmm. I'm going to favor Duluth coming in and getting the win here. But at the same time, I think it's Augustana's offenses looks pretty disjointed, and has not been the team that I thought they were going to be this year, especially coming down the stretch. I'm taking Duluth.
Okay. All right. And last game this week in the Pick'em is the South Atlantic Conference game between Newberry and Wingate. And Matt, you get to start out again.
I like what Wingate did over the weekend. Newberry's always a mystery with us. So, I mean, they'll probably win just because of that and kind of put a schmaz on the whole where's Wingate going to be at and then the regional rankings and everything else. But I like Wingate and their defense and what they're doing. I'm going to take them here.
I am going to take them as well because I believe they'll play solid football, play defense, and do enough to make Newberry make enough mistakes that they'll come away with the win and score enough to win. That will be their path to victory. Chuck, what are your thoughts?
I think that Newberry's offense relies a lot on, firstly, their running game with Mario Anderson. I think Wingate can shut that down. They shut down Lenore Ryan's running game. But beyond that, they're very reliant on quarterback Dre Harris just improvising, and I just don't think that's going to work against the Wingate defense. So I'm going to go with the Bulldogs.
Okay. Devin.
I'm going to go with Wingate as well in this one. Newberry said earlier, they Jekyll and Hyde kind of deal where they lose teams at games they shouldn't and win games they probably shouldn't on there as well. So, but I'm going to go with Wingate and just kind of roll the dice on this one.
Chris, who do you have?
I mean, I think it's tempting to go with Wingate, but as y'all have mentioned, Newberry is just so all over the place. You never know what you're going to get. I'm going to go with Newberry here. I'm going to be the contrarian.
Okay. And then, Justin, you're the last one.
Yeah, I've had the opportunity to see both of these teams play in the last 2 weeks, and I think you all have kind of to hit on it. You know, Newberry, they rely a lot on the combination of Mario Anderson and Dre Harris. However, that Wingate defense is phenomenal. Maybe one of the best, if not the best, defenses I've seen in the South Atlantic Conference in a long time. And so Shaw Crocker can just do enough offensively, I think, to keep Wingate in games and to win games. So I think Wingate is going to win this game at home, but if Newberry pulls the upset, it wouldn't surprise me, but I'm going to take Wingate at home.
All right. Very good. All right. I'm going to pull that down, guys. So if you're leaning back, go ahead and sit back up to the screen. So Tony, who do you got in Wayne State, Sioux Falls?
You're on mute.
That's good.
Tony.
I'm going to pull him off.
Sorry, Sioux Falls in that one.
Okay. Tusculum at Mars Hill.
Tusculum.
Okay. Gannon in California.
Cal.
Okay. West Georgia and Delta.
Delta.
Duluth and Augie.
Duluth.
And Newberry and Wingate.
Wingate.
All right.
It'll
Awesome.
be a long time before I ever pick Newberry in a game.
If we are lucky enough that you write for the GLIAC next year and that you are one of the hosts of Inside D2 Football, you're going to have to make meaningful selections in this next year.
That's fair.
We're going to hold your feet to the fire on that one. All right. Let's go ahead and I want to share a couple things since we've got time. First, a piece of news from Division II. I saw this today and I didn't know that it was still a possibility, but the President's Council has supported a proposal that would permit football players at Division II schools in their initial year of enrollment. That's key. They can play up to 3 games without triggering a season of competition. I believe this is currently the rule in Division I, and I think it is phenomenal, both in terms of filling out a roster, as Chuck and I talked about earlier, with teams who might be banged up. In addition, I think it's great for student retention. You know, most of these teams are comprised with of players who were the studs at their high school. And number one, it's tough to get somebody to sit out an entire year when they were used to being the star. And number two, Division II is a partial scholarship system. So it's a little different if you're at Division I and you get a full ride and they ask you to sit out, although they're doing that less and less. But in Division II, you're paying a lot of times a lot of money to sit out. And I think this will help for student retention and be good for student athletes. So does anybody think this is a negative? All right, great. You better not. No, I'm just kidding. All right. And then go ahead, Justin.
No. I do think it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing on a couple different levels, right? So we talk about the good for the retention and good for the program, but I also think it's good for the program, right? You recruit a kid, he's in your program, especially if you have an early enrollee who comes in January, they're in their summer conditioning, summer programming, whatever that may look like, and then they come through camp, and so then you have the opportunity to, see what they look like and are they going to fit in your program. So. And I didn't read on that, Brandon. Did it say when did it had to be the first 3 games or just 3 games in the?
I think
course
3 games. I think 3 games total.
Right. If you look at a kid,
yeah, go ahead and keep talking.
So if you wait until like now in the season to see what you have in some of those kids that maybe didn't play a lot early, maybe you're out of playoffs, whatever that may look like, you can get a real game evaluation on some kids and make an evaluation. Do they fit in your program? Do they not fit in your program? And then it's a good win-win for both sides, right? Because from a student-athlete perspective, if you're paying, you don't have to stay if you're not going to play. And then also if you're a program, you could evaluate the kids and say, okay, well, these 3 kids, they're never going to play for us because they can't help us. And you cut them loose and let them find another better opportunity. But so that's just one thought I had. And then I think the other thing it does is it forces it allows programs to think about the health and safety for injured players. So you're not forcing them to play, especially through injuries. You're banged up. You could play maybe somebody who's not going to play a lot or doesn't get to play because you're going to have to redshirt them to play. You're not burning a red shirt to play a kid because you have a couple players injured. So you have the health and safety of the players there as well, if that makes sense.
No, it absolutely does. And I mean, I'm sure people will see or figure out a lot of different ways to do it. Some may do it with injury. Some may play all of them and just rotate them on the roster. And here you get a couple of special teams plays or something like that. I could see it being done in a number of different ways.
Sure.
All right. One thing that they didn't take an opinion on the President's Council was that there was a proposal to permit spring scrimmages against other programs, and they did not take they did not take an opinion on that. I think it's great. Chuck, you really did a great job covering the South Atlantic Conference and a couple of the other conferences that played spring football, and that was fun, but it's not the same. But I think I would prefer that they would let a scrimmage happen. For instance, Matt Witwicky and I were at one between Sioux Falls and Northwest Missouri, and I thought it was a beneficial day for both squads. And I wish they would support this.
Well, the most high-profile thing that happened during that spring COVID season, where really only 4 conferences played, but the most high-profile thing that happened was when Grand Valley went down to Valdosta State for a scrimmage.
Yep.
And they both got a lot of mileage out of that.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing. I really do.
I hope that they take it back up, and I hope they take an opinion on it, and that opinion is positive that this should be allowed. So I would probably take the opinion it should not be allowed with another conference opponent. It should have to be somebody outside the conference, maybe.
So, you mean we don't have to go silo for that too?
Don't give him any ideas, Whit. Good God. All right. Let me share one other thing then. And
I already have silo playoffs. I had it last year with Bemidji and Augie.
All right. One other thing I wanted to share. Bryce Duffy is a player for Bemidji State, or he was before he was injured this year. He had a spinal contusion during a game. I believe that's what it was with. He's made a miraculous recovery. He's walking, and that's great. But there are medical expenses associated with that. If you're so inclined, the family's trying to raise. I guess it's the family is trying to raise some money. Doesn't matter who started it, but if you're so inclined, go to GoFundMe. And then Bryce Duffy, BryceDuffy. Search for that. And if you're so inclined, help out the young man. I'm thrilled that he's making the progress he is. When there was a question if he would walk again, and here it is a month later, and he is. And I couldn't be more thrilled than I am for that. So
absolutely.
anyway, so all right, let's go ahead and look at. I want to give some plugs. Say thanks again. Remember to like and subscribe our social media. It's all or like and subscribe this. Sorry, our social media is at D2Football on Twitter. Some of you are watching it on Twitter now, and Facebook.com/D2Football, and you can search for us on YouTube, and I believe we might be able to actually get YouTube.com/D2Football, but that's still pending. We've been the source for Division II football news since 2000. Again, our columnists, this thing is filled with columnists. I'm the only fool that doesn't write. And, they provide a perspective that your local guy might not. So if you're, reading the Grand Rapids Press or if you're reading the Maryville Forum or Hickory Daily Record, you're going to get one perspective. But our guys provide a different and sometimes better and certainly sometimes less biased perspective than your local people will. And I think that they do a great service to everybody. And then on game days, fans can access our scoreboard. You can sort scores by top 25. It's very busy on Saturday, as you might think. Sort by super region or all. And again, you can find archives of this show on the website too if you ever need one. A little bit behind on that sometimes, but they will be there. And then also, we have the biggest collection of the best fans, D2 fans in the country on our message board. I know people like to communicate via Twitter, and it's very easy. Certainly, no doubt, it's easier than the message board. But a great set of fans are on the message board, and I think you would enjoy joining them. Also, wanted to thank Inkblot for the work that he does. The GMAC network, the MIAA network, the PSAC network, News 19 and KELO TV for the use of their highlights today. So with no further ado, let's go ahead and look at the questions that we might have this week. Chuck, let's look at this one. Is the SAC expected to add a new football member to keep the divisions even once Anderson, a program I'm very excited to see starts fielding a team in 2024?
Well, there's a couple directions that they could go with that. First of all, yeah, I'm really excited about Anderson too. They are building some really, really nice facilities on their campus to start up football. They've got a great coach on board. So they're doing things the right way. I'm excited about them. With the divisions, if they want to keep that, of course, you want to have even numbers. Keep in mind that Erskine and Barton are affiliate members. They're not full members. So there's some latitude there that those relationships could end. Expansion is a possibility. Typically, that's a topic I try to explore in the off season, and I never get honest answers when I ask that question anyway. So I know that they're going to want to keep even numbers, but keep in mind that it's just as likely or just as possible that somebody will leave as somebody coming in.
Okay.
Can I mention something there?
No. Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, bud. Yeah.
It'll be really interesting to kind of see how that goes because Conference Carolinas, which is a non-football playing conference, has several members who are affiliate members for football. And so that's certainly an avenue that I think that some teams are going to be looking to try to start a league for football via the Conference Carolinas route. So, it's certainly possible that, you have more shrinking in the South Atlantic than growing. And I also want to mention, who cares about even divisions, i.e. the SIAC?
All right.
True.
Makes scheduling a little easier, but nonetheless. All right, let's look at this. Tyson Bagent is 2 passing touchdowns short of the D2 record. Jimmy Terwilliger, the current record holder. Oh, wow, I did not know this. Will be the opposing coach. That's really awesome.
There's Bagent actually exceeded a couple of Jimmy Terwilliger's records this past weekend, and I think he's 2 away from tying and 3 away from claiming that record. So pretty amazing accomplishment. And Jimmy Terwilliger, I know, will be very gracious when those records go down. He's an amazing guy.
He's a good dude. So, well, he's gotten lots of flack for the beating he took it.
Yeah, he only ever played 1 game in his college career at Grand Valley State.
That is correct.
Never did counted.
and they didn't have turf back then, so I think they buried him in underground. So that's at least what I've heard.
I was at that game, and I can vouch that the Lakers were not kind to the visitors in that one.
That is that. Oh my goodness!
He's one tough guy.
All
yes,
right,
yes, I can vouch for that.
All right, help me understand this one, guys, because we don't ignore criticism. Why are we soft on our GAC comments? It's obvious by your lack of consistent coverage. Watchtower best Harding, 3 scores to 2. Are we playing baseball? And Henderson beats Harding by a PAT. Let's be more GAC literate. All right.
Yeah.
First, let me address the first thing. All right, because all right. My perspective is always national. All right. So my perspective in any year could be, if anybody doesn't know, I live in Kansas City. I'm in the middle of the MIAA. But there are tons of years, every year, when I can tell you more about Ferris State's roster than I can tell you about 80% of the MIAA's roster. All right. It's just the way my perspective is. So I would say the GAC has to earn my respect and my attention, not the other way around. All right. Having said that, the grumpiness is gone. Chuck, go ahead and answer.
Well, I don't know exactly what the context was about us not being GAC literate. I feel that we have been. I was also going to say that, we talked about the GAC a lot last year because they had an exceptionally exciting season in the GAC last year. This year, it's still really good football, but you've got one team has a 2-game lead on the field.
Right.
It's just not quite as deep of a field as it was last year. So we're not talking about the GAC quite as much as we did a year ago. That's just the way it goes.
Okay.
Well, how many have been nationally relevant this year? Meaning a top 25. You've had Wichita, you've had Harding.
Yeah.
It's a lot more parity in the league. I mean, we could talk about Southern As if you like.
True. Picking up some wins,
which we would do if we had fantasy section.
Southern Nazarene has a good as I know they've shut up, Chris.
Their quarterback is one of the best. Their quarterback's one of the best rushers in Division II, actually.
Right.
Yeah.
Southern Nazarene has played a lot of games close, even the ones they've lost. They've had a good season by their marks, and even getting a win this year. So I guess if we know,
not when I saw them against Wichita, but anyway.
That way, here
Wichita was giving the ball to the ref quite a bit, but anyway.
If we know that about Southern Nazarene, one of the worst teams in the league, I think we probably do know a little bit about the GAC. But like Chuck said, we're not just dividing our attention equally every week among 15 different conferences. It's not the way this stuff works. All right.
Well, if you take a look, Brandon, a lot of other conferences have more teams that have come in and out of the top 25.
Yes, that's true.
If we're gonna be real frank.
Yeah.
And that's a big piece of it because we really focus in on what we consider to be the best of the best each week. And I think you can easily say the top 25 is a good gauge of that.
Right. And last year, the JC was one of those leagues. This year, not quite as much.
Right.
Okay. I mean, I have a slightly different take. I just have a slightly different take because, I think as you get into this part of the year and we start talking about playoffs, the GAC outside of Harding really hasn't, lived up to the potential that they kind of throw out there. So, I mean, there's a little bit of that too. When we talk about Super Region 3 and how competitive that Super Region is, we're already looking at, some of the other conferences because those are the schools that have really gone far, even if they have a lower seed. So there is a tendency to kind of like downplay the Great American a little bit. And it's really up to them to show up and show us differently.
Well, and I think to put a bow on it, maybe too, Chris, you got it. I think you got it nailed, and you marry it with what Whit said earlier. If you look at what their resumes have over the next 2 weeks, they're capped. The insular schedule basically caps what their capability is going to be to have some control by playing more competitive schedules and having a higher strength of schedule, and being able to win enough games to be able to get you into that 6 or 7 line over other 2-loss teams or what have you. So I mean, it's All
right. Going to pull up this one, and I'm going to expand on it a little bit. So it was during the regional rankings thing. Joe says as the season wears on, I'm not sure who's rated properly. Maybe it's just football. And this goes to my point that I make a lot in that everybody makes the mistake of thinking that Team A is the team that they saw or the team that played against their team. Team A is 11 different teams in 11 different weeks during the regular season, depending on when you play them. And everybody gives way too much credence to what they saw the day they saw them, that when they played their team. So it's not difficult to understand what you're thinking, Joe, but it's just understand that it's not as simple as on Madden, this team's in 93 and they're going to be in 93 every game. That is not the way humanity works. All right.
I explained that to a poster on Twitter this past week who, lambasted me for what happened with me saying Chowan could win against Virginia Union. And the one thing I just kind of point out to him was the same thing anybody would point out to an investor. Past performance does not predict future outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what the rankings are. We're looking more at the past and we're not really sure how it's going to play out. And then teams move up or down based on the outcomes.
So, right. Agreed, Chris. I mean, I thought of that same thing, but it's just somebody's not necessarily who you saw that day. So, all right. There are some other things I want to address. They're talking about, this is kind of a reference to margin of victory. It doesn't matter as part of the criteria, even though it's what we talk about. It's the criteria test, not the reality test or whatever we had a couple of weeks ago, whatever grumpy thing I said that week. But it doesn't matter.
Test, not the common sense test.
There you go. Thank you, Tony. I knew you would know. I love you, man. So anyway, yes, it's the criteria test, not the common sense test. Having said that, I've seen lots of teams get their doors blown off in the regular season and make the championship game. It's just the way it happens. Again, it's that day. It's not who they are. You're more than the one fight you just lost. So all right. Let's see. All right, not going to do that one. All right, this is going to be me going on another rant. All right, sorry guys. You guys just want to leave, and I'll just rant the rest of the time. Okay.
Brandon's corner.
Yeah, exactly. Devin's got it. The issue is that the subjective eyeball test can't be done when the MIAA doesn't play outside of the league. I disagree. I think when we're talking, I don't need to see a team play anybody to know how good they're going to be. I'm not always right, but I feel like I can make an evaluation sometimes comparing that team to itself in the past. I don't think that we have to see all these things. I think all the criteria is about people making a defensible argument, but it's not as good as it would be if 10 football people actually chose the 10 people who made each region. I do believe that. You guys may have a very different opinion than me on that one.
See, I think we can do that, but I think it's hard for them as a committee to rank teams based on that without any concrete evidence, as you said, a defense argument with it. And that's where it kind of falls apart to me. If you're taking your own defense away from yourself kind of deal, because I think the MIAA is a very good conference, but there's no way to prove that in 2022. We can look at 2021 and 2020 and past results, but that didn't really impact this year.
Okay. There was another comment about that. And I think it was by my friend Bradley Damron, but I don't see it. Maybe I forgot to start. And he was talking about but that was last year. I agree it was last year conceptually, but how many times have we heard that over the years? I've heard these. All right. Been running this website since the year 2000. There are two things I've heard more. You have never seen a team like this, which ends up being total crap. And you can't base it upon last year. But what happens when the Shepherd keeps winning every year, and advancing in Super Region 1? What happens when Ferris does it year after year after year? Last year is important. Now, 10 years ago might not be, but the previous year is important when evaluating a team even for this year.
Which is why I think in Super Region 3 that if it's either Northwest or Emporia with 2 losses, Northwest has a better chance of getting in than Emporia State would if they have 2 losses, just because of that perception. With Super Region 3 using stuff away from the material a little bit more than the other regions on there, I think that could factor into it because Northwest has had that history of year in, year out compared to Emporia last year being down. So if there's going to be a 2-loss in my AA team, I think it's going to be Northwest and not Emporia, just based on that.
But the only reason that caveat might be applicable is because we know that they would both end with a 500 SOS. in a situation where Emporia has a 550 and Northwest would have a 480, I think Emporia would get in, regardless of the the reputation.
And head to head.
Right.
Head to head.
Right.
I'm saying,
Well, this year, neither one of those.
Last week. So if like Emporia State, if they're 9-2, facing off against either Truman 9-2, Harding 9-2, who do they take? I'm not sure they take Emporia State, but if it's Northwest at 9-2 versus Truman and Harding, the committee might take Northwest in a tiebreaker situation. That's just the human factor, I think, that comes into effect that people want to talk about with the eyeball test and stuff like that. That's what I'm saying with both those teams. If one of them is 2 losses, Northwest has a better chance at 9-2 than Emporia State would at 9-2. Only one of them can be 9-2 at this point, but in those certain hypothetical situations is what I'm getting at with that. So that clarifies that.
All right. I think this is a great observation. The regional rankings are not based upon rule. They are based upon metrics, and how those metrics are decided largely determines who makes it. So I agree. That's a good one. All right. In this case, Bradley, you can't punish other conferences for stepping outside the league and potentially doing well. In this case, it's benefit to the GLIAC this year. I mean, they stepped outside their league and they're in like Flint. I mean, it's funny when Saginaw lost, my thought process didn't turn to, well, they're out. It turned to, can the GLIAC get 4 teams in? Because of how well they've done in the non-conference. So, all right. I don't think we have anything else. What do you think, Chuck? Are we good?
No, I think it was just a lot of good discussion amongst the audience, but I didn't see a lot of other questions of the panel.
Okay. All right. Sorry, Devin, you should follow up on that. So, all right. Well, guys, I think that will do it then, unless any other comments. Well, hold on. Let me check the other comments. Or had you already checked the comments, Chuck?
I've been scrolling back through my.
Great.
I think
all
we're
right.
good.
All right. Great. All right. We'll end there then, guys. So thank you, everybody, for watching. Chuck, Matt, Devin, Chris, Tony, Justin, thanks for being here. Thanks for being a part of this. We will see you all next week. Man, what a great week it was. Hopefully next week is just as good. But in any case, thank you for watching Inside D2 Football.